This week on the podcast, we talk pensions. And is it just another tax on the business owner? And what else do you need to be considering? Welcome to the Profit Cash Growth Podcast. This is the podcast for 6 and 7 figure business owners who are looking to grow a financially successful business. My co-host, Claire Hancott, is a finance director, chartered accountant and entrepreneur. And every week, I'll be exploring guidance and frameworks designed to help you increase your profits, improve your cash flow and grow your business. So, Claire, have you ever heard the saying, when you pay attention?
I have, because you keep whittering on about it over the last few weeks, but...
Do you know why I now fully understand this saying?
Why?
It's shortly after the 10 minutes to which we paid £20 to watch Anthony Joshua get knocked out in round 5.
Oh, I love watching boxing, and it's often on quite late, and you're not such a fan, so I don't often splash out for the pay-per-view fights. And
no, but I was on the edge of my seat. I was on the edge of my seat. And do you know why? Because I'd paid 20 quid, so I wanted to absorb every minute of every minute was like £1, wasn't it? So
and when he went down in round 1, it was a bit of a waste of money, because normally they go the full 10, 12 rounds, don't they?
I quite enjoyed it. You know, I like this to be short, snappy, in, out and done. That's fine. But yeah, this is an interesting saying. You hear this saying a lot, and first of all, you think, it's a bit of a scam, because it's always said by people selling these really expensive courses, isn't it?
Yeah.
They're like, get free, you don't pay attention, blah, blah, blah. But the more I think about this, the more that I believe it's absolutely true. And I do, you see it in also, and I've listened to lots of podcasts where people talk about how damaging free can be to their business. People don't expect, well, I don't know where I'm going with this. I was going to say people don't expect free for they expect a discount, but it's the wrong way around. The point I was trying to make is that I've totally lost my trail of thought now. What am I on about?
When you pay attention.
Yes, when you pay attention. And I do believe that, because I do believe that in your mindset, that when you especially when you paid a lot of money, you absolutely feel accountable to turning up. You absolutely feel like you want to get value for that money. And I totally agree. And actually, this comes down, I don't want to get political here, but this comes down a little bit to the whole NHS thing and the whole GP thing and why we have so many missed appointments in GPs, isn't it?
Very true, very true.
Because people aren't paying, so they're not paying attention to the appointment or to the importance of coming to that appointment. And I absolutely believe that that's the case. So as much as you do hear these sort of guru selling courses say that, I'm a big believer in it, and I certainly saw myself evidencing it in the Anthony Joshua fight situation. But so that's my tidbit for the week anyway.
So what's our news story of the week then, Simon?
Oh, well, this week it's an interesting one, and I don't want you to get a sinking feeling. So this week's news story of the week is, shock horror, Titanic builder Harland and Wolff set to collapse. And when I saw this, my first thought was, hang on a minute, the builder of what was labelled as the world's first unsinkable ship that sank managed to get through that reputational damage and actually survive and go on for, 80 odd years longer, and now finally collapse. Do you know what? You're going to tell me this because you told me this a minute ago. So they managed to survive the Titanic sinking, but they didn't manage to survive what, Claire? Brexit. Yeah, there we go.
Well, interestingly, though, I think there was a little bit of luck with what happened with why they survived the sinking. One of the biggest things, actually, when you read about it online is obviously a lot of people know the film of Titanic, but the reality was very different. And part of the issue was back in the day, trying to subpoena people to court for them to have to be held culpable and pay compensation and things like that was very, very difficult, because it was on a global scale. There was people from all countries on board the ship, and therefore there was British people, American people from all sorts of countries. So even getting witness statements, things like that was very difficult, and people didn't even necessarily know in that day and age that you could sue somebody. And so actually I read that they only paid out 4% of all claims that were put to them. They're very limited liability. And in today's money, they paid about £180 million in today's money, which I've just found staggering, actually.
Right, yeah. Impressive.
So anyway, they were actually helped a little bit by World War One. Obviously, Titanic sank in 1912, and then in 1914, because they're a shipbuilder, all of a sudden, all of their ships, everything had to go into the war effort. Yeah, so they did receive.
They took a load of government money, a load of government debt out to build the ships and whatever else. Actually, it probably saved them.
Yeah, and that got them through for a few years.
It probably also distracted from the whole Titanic thing, didn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
World War breaks out, yeah.
And then in 1933, they merged with Cunard and sort of the White Star name eventually sort of went anyway by the 1950s. Nobody knew the name White Star anymore. It's just sort of for the history books now in the Titanic movie. But what happened to them? Well, actually, I think the writing was kind of on the wall. Over the years, they've moved away from sort of building like cruise liner ships like the original Titanic, and they were much more in the oil and gas industries and building infrastructure and ships and platforms and things for them. And therefore, that in itself is not necessarily a dying industry. It should be a dying industry if you believe everything about what's been said about climate change, but investment in it is very dependent on what's happening in the global economy and what's happening with oil prices, etc., etc., etc. So that's heavily impacted it. Brexit,
theoretically, fossil fuel transportation should be a declining industry. This is one we'd be interested to get the numbers on, wouldn't it? Because just to go under the net zero challenges as to whether that is actually the case or not.
Well, interestingly, I think people generally in the global sort of business world generally accept that fossil fuels are dying out, because in 2019 a company bought what was left of White Star, but they bought it specifically for the land. They wanted the shipyard, and they wanted the shipyard to repurpose it as a renewable site.
Okay.
Not for shipbuilding anymore. Okay. So that was done back in 2019. The writing was on the wall. They were very vocal about why they were buying what was left of the Titanic business, and it wasn't for the business itself of making shipbuilding. It was for the land that they had. So
the land must have some value. So they've collapsed, and they must have some land value to be able to pay back their creditors.
Yeah, absolutely. But they've been in administration, I think, since 2018. They first went into administration. So, I mean,
shortly after the Brexit vote.
Yeah, but the thing with Brexit is obviously when you order a ship, you're probably not going to get that ship for 5 to 10 years. So as a business, when we were discussing Brexit and voting on Brexit, if you were a business in, I don't know, Taiwan, and you were going to order a ship, would you risk ordering that from the UK? When the Brexit vote was going to happen and things like that, because all of a sudden, there was so much uncertainty, and you're talking like millions and millions of pounds, if not billions of pounds of investment, and you can't afford to have tariffs slapped on that at the last minute. So for that reason, Brexit did really hit them quite hard. And then their owner went bust as well, a Norwegian company called Dolphin Drilling.
So there we go. That's this week's news story of the week. Titanic builder is no more. Goodbye, Titanic. Not only is your ship sunk,
I think we said
so has
goodbye
the builder.
Titanic in 1912, didn't we?
I don't know. They keep bringing it up. I mean, Titanic seems to just be the ongoing story forever, isn't it? I mean,
but it's because it's one of the best films ever made, I think.
Yeah, I don't even know if it's about the film. There's been a lot of Titanic stuff. I mean, especially since those people, had the capsule blow up on them or whatever happened.
Well, yeah, because it was called the Titanic, wasn't it? Ironically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right, let's move on to this week's Deep Dive, Claire. So this week we're talking pensions, and the reason we're talking pensions is because this is often a little overlooked cost that business owners forget to factor in when they're growing their teams, isn't it, Claire?
Yeah, absolutely. And also it's quite topical actually when we're talking about how much taxes as an individual people are paying, because auto-enrollment was brought in 2012, and it means that it's basically become mandatory that as an employer, when your employees are eligible for auto-enrollment pension, you legally have to provide them with a pension scheme and do what's called opt-in. But also the employee has to pay as well. So the employee actually has to pay 5% of their salary into a pension scheme. So it's a little bit of a hidden tax, really, especially if you believe what some individuals are saying, that by the time we get to retirement age in sort of 30 years' time,
the pension might be means tested.
So,
and step one of that is this winter fuel allowance element.
Yeah, but we're going off on a tangent. Let's talk about, as an employer, what you need to know about auto-enrollment, how much it costs you, and what you need to do.
Yeah. I mean, the other factor to this is that it's annoyingly just another tax. So therefore, it is frustratingly just another barrier to employing people and growing your team. When I know so many people just want to do that. I want to do that. But then, you used to go, the salary I need to pay this person's X. And then you will be in my ear going, don't forget 13.5 national insurance. Don't forget 5% pension contribution. Don't forget. So before you add on all that, you're putting another third on the wage, and it becomes quite a big number then.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you turn that back into how many sales you then need to do to pay for that person.
Yeah.
You think, oh my goodness.
Yeah, and that's why when you're planning, not only from a cost perspective but a cash flow perspective, you really need to know what in the industry we refer to as the loaded cost of an employee. And the loaded cost would be the actual everything in. So the salary, bonus, cost of, if you've got to provide them with computer equipment, if you've got to provide company car and pay for fuel. Yeah. So loaded cost is absolutely every cost associated with that employee, and pension's one of them.
So who's eligible, Claire, for pensions?
Okay, so you've got two different categories. The first is what we officially call an eligible worker, and that's somebody who is over the age of 22 and over, and they must earn £10,000 a year from you. And they are an eligible worker, and that means that they must be opted into a pension. So this is often a point of confusion, is the employee will say, well, I don't want to be in it, so just don't put me in it in the first place. And unfortunately, you don't have that choice. When you're an eligible worker, you must be opted in to auto-enrollment. And only once you've been opted in, can you then opt out.
Yep. And I get why they do this. I mean, I thought, oh, this is just a load of painful paperwork and whatever else. But again, they're trying to, prey on human nature, that people just they sign up and then they forget to opt back out again, and then they're in it and various other things, because they want this to be the tax for pension. So theoretically, in 30, 50 years, they don't have to pay pensions anymore. You know where this is going. So.
And then there's also another category of worker called an entitled worker. And
there's quite a lot of them in the UK at the moment.
Yeah. And that's when somebody's earnings doesn't meet that £10,000 threshold, but they earn over £6,240 a year, then what's called an entitled worker.
Okay.
And you don't have to opt them in, but the employee has the option to request to be opted in. And if they request to be opted in as an employee, you can't deny them.
Okay, fine. So there's two different types of letters you would send to those people, isn't there?
Yeah, so when you take somebody on, you have to tell them what category they're in. So you tell them whether they're not eligible, whether they're an entitled worker or an eligible worker. But most payroll systems or if you use Nest, then they produce all these letters for you. That's a really great thing. They're just standardised templates, and it's literally when an employee starts and you run their first payroll, you give them a letter.
So you just need to make sure it's part of their onboarding sort of starter paperwork and all the rest of that. So moving on to kind of how much we need to pay these people, or what that looks like, both from an employer's perspective and an employee. Tell us a bit about that. Yeah,
so since auto-enrollment was introduced in 2012, the total pension contributions has increased, and it's now a total combined contribution of 8%. So somebody's salary, 8% has got to be contributed to their pension.
Across both employee and employee.
Yeah, and at the moment, that's split 5% on the employee and 3% to the employer.
Okay, fine.
So it's quite a lot, actually. The 5% for the employee does include the tax of 20% that they'd save. So actually it's like 4% for the employee.
Yeah, they get the tax back on it.
But for an employer, it's 3%.
Does the employer get the tax back?
Well, it's a tax deductible expense, so it's 3%, but you get corporation tax saving. And if you're paying 25% corporation tax saving, then you've got to factor that in. It's actually 2.25% is the cost to your business or your pocket. But
you're not getting any VAT,
call it 3%.
Any VAT back or anything like that, are you?
No, there's no VAT on pensions.
No, so it's still a true cost to the business owner, isn't it?
So when you're thinking about taking on an employee, you need to add 3% to their cost. Now, there are different ways that you can calculate this 3%, and there is different phrases called like pensionable earnings, basic pay, things like that. Now, the most common method, because it's the easiest to administer, is that you apply the 3% to their basic pay, somebody's salary.
Yep.
So this only really comes in if you pay like bonuses and commission and things like that. But you can choose to not pay pension contributions on commissions, bonus, holiday pay. All of those types of things can be excluded from the calculation.
Right. Okay.
But
so legally you must pay on the basic salary, but there's no legal requirement to pay on the commissions and bonuses that are on top of that.
Yeah, but there is
about 0-hour contracts?
Sorry, just to clarify on that. There is a stipulation, so you can't pay somebody a really low salary and then pay really high bonus and commissions to avoid pension. So you do need to do a calculation, which actually as a employer you don't really need to do. Your payroll system or your pension provider should be doing for you to make sure that you're in all those legal limits and that you're not doing anything you're not supposed to, because that is quite a confusing area of the law to understand. Actually, is around what goes in and what's out of that calculation, and therefore what percentage you have to pay, what percentage minimum you have to pay.
Okay. And 0-hour contracts, so how do they deal with them? Yeah,
so 0-hour contracts and seasonal workers is another really good example, actually, to clarify, because particularly for businesses that might take people on in the summertime or over Christmas, things like that, you can actually defer. When somebody joins your business, you can defer making the assessment to see whether they're eligible or entitled to be in auto-enrollment or not. You can defer that for 3 months. Okay. So then what you would do is you'd look at somebody's earnings over the last 3 months, and if they've hit the threshold to be enrolled, then you would enroll them. And if they haven't hit the threshold, then you would tell them they've not hit the threshold, and Therefore, they wouldn't have to be in the pension scheme. And a lot of zero-hour contract workers and things like that probably not going to hit that threshold.
Right, okay, so it's all about the thresholds, really. Fine, perfect. So talk to us about the schemes. So what schemes are out there? What should we be using as business owners, and should employees be considering the scheme they're put into?
Yes. Now, this is a really interesting one, actually, because as an employee, you don't really have a choice over the pension scheme that your employer pays into. But as an individual, you have ultimate control about where your pension sits. So firstly, I will just clarify that we're not recommending any of these. We're not financial advisors. We're just talking from a purely accounting perspective on what an employer's obligations are. You need to do your own research on what one is more appropriate for you and for your employees. There is a government one called Nest that's most common with small employers. There's no fees for using it for the employer, and Nest just take a small percentage out of the annual pension pot, like to cover administration costs and things like that, from the employee's pension pot. So as the employer, you pay all the contributions into the pension pot, and then the employee owns the pension pot. The employee can decide if they move it away from Nest into somebody different, and Nest deduct any fees from the employee's pot. As an employer, you don't pay any fees.
I'm guessing you don't know what that percentage is that they take.
It depends on the size of the pot. There are different grades.
Okay. Because actually, as you know, with pensions compounded, if it's a 1% fee, it can eat an enormous amount of your pension by the time you hit pension.
There's normally a minimum fee to pay, and then you pay a percentage above that.
So
but
you really should check out the small print in the details, and take it to a proper financial advisor to make sure that you're.
But it's really minimal. Some of the lowest paid workers will literally be paying like a few quid a year. It's not a lot of money.
It's not. Okay.
So that's the most commonly used among small businesses is Nest. It's easy to use. It does all the paperwork for you as well. So when you take an employee on, you put them onto your payroll system, but you also put them onto the Nest system, and that triggers all the paperwork at the right times to the employee and does everything for you. You use that, don't you?
Yeah, I do. Is that a private company or is it a government-owned company, or is it just a government recommended to company? I've never really known.
So the pension scheme is invested in private pensions.
Yeah.
But the scheme itself is managed by the government.
Okay.
Yeah. And it is intended for small employers. That's exactly why it's been set up, is for small employers to manage this auto-enrollment burden. It was set up after auto-enrollment.
So it's the equivalent of NSI as a bank, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, similar to that sort of thing.
Fine. I wouldn't be putting my money in it. But okay. But that's for the employee to do their own due diligence on what they do. But as an employer, you don't care. The minimum, the money you've got to put in is the money you've got to put in. If you really, 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 really cared about your employees' best interests, you could look at something, you could analyse it, you could do something different, better, whatever.
Absolutely. And once, as an employer, once you paid that money over to Nest, that money is the employees. They can put that in they can put it in different schemes depending on how risk averse they are. Their age, they can put it in a highly risky one, they can put it in a low risk one. So the employee then is in full control.
It's their job to get the financial advice and do the right thing with that pot of money.
Yes,
because I know if you just leave it when I often listen to financial advisors and podcasts about this and various other things, that actually it's probably not the best place to leave it in Nest's standard scheme, because quite rightly as well, it is incredibly low risk, because obviously they don't want to lose everybody's money, but therefore it's not giving you a great return over its lifetime. So as an employee, you would encourage people to say, find out the detail and make sure you're doing the best with your pot.
Yeah, and at the moment that obligation is entirely on the employee for small businesses. When you're in a bigger business, you've got a bit more of an obligation to assess the pension schemes and things like that, but that doesn't apply to small businesses. Here's
an interesting moral dilemma for you, because without going too deep into it, I do think that there is a big scandal around the fact that even the amounts of money that people are putting in this, with how low risk these investment pots are, that the pots of money are not going to grow to anything that's going to be useful to somebody. Do you feel like, as a responsible employer, that the employer should be doing more to educate their employees on doing the very best for them? If they truly have their best interests at heart, should they be putting more in place?
Yeah, and I think this is then where
responsibility on the employer.
If you're a small business, one of the reasons you might choose to not use Nest is because if you go with one of the private bigger companies, Aviva, Scottish Widow, Aegon, anybody like that, generally you get some sort of access to pension workshops and things like that. When I've worked at big employers, we always have we would always pay a monthly fee for an outsourced pension advisor company, and they would come in and do a
training course and just educate people on
every time we took on a new employee, they would come in once a month and hold sessions with the new employees to talk them through the pension options. Now ultimately they're getting a kickback somewhere down the road.
No, I get that, but they're not. People aren't.
People would get access to that free advice as an employee. What's right for you? What's your retirement age? What risk factor do you want to put into your pension scheme? Because it's so confusing.
Who's helping the employee who's the employee that's age 20 who has many years to be in a much higher risk fund versus the employee who's 55 who should be in a low risk fund? Who's having those conversations and educating? Because Nest aren't doing that. Not from what I can see.
No.
Or and offering also, that. And therefore the government aren't offering that.
Well, as an employer as well, you can't do that because you're not an advisor.
No, but you could offer them a financial advisor, is my point. You could offer them the right route to take to go and talk to the right person.
And this is something that has always been quite difficult when I've been a finance director in businesses, because employees will come to me and they'll say, "Oh, I don't understand the pension. What should I be doing? Should I pay more money or not?" And I have really to say, I actually legally cannot tell you this.
Which I find just that by itself is a cop out to employees and a disservice to people of this country.
Well, I'm not appropriately trained to give that. So it's right that, yes, I've got probably more knowledge about pensions than the average person, but I'm still not qualified to financial advisor standards. So therefore, I'm not qualified to give the right impartial advice to that individual.
You're not, but you're allowed to give life advice. You're allowed to tell them where to go. You're allowed to tell them that they should be thinking about that. It's vitally important that they go and seek the advice and understand that they're probably not in the right place and raising those flags.
The other thing that...
hiding behind this whole FCA thing is just a load of BS, I think, if you're not careful.
The other thing that employers have got to be really careful of, and why I'm always quite strict on discussing pensions with employees, is because with auto-enrollment, as we said, you must enrol somebody before they can opt out. But the employee should not tell you, the employer, they want to opt out. They should actually tell the pension company. So if you enrol somebody on Nest, the employee has to tell Nest they want to opt out, and then Nest pass that message over to you. You're not actually allowed to have a conversation with the employee about whether they opt in or out or not. And the reason that was introduced is that there's because it's a cost to an employer.
There's a conflict of interest.
They don't want the employers encouraging employees to not be in the pension scheme to reduce their costs. So you actually have to be really careful about being completely standoff. And if somebody says, I don't understand my options, you push them in the direction of the pension provider or the pension advisor that you're using, and you do actually have to legally stay out of it.
Fair enough. And sadly, these people are not offering that advice, which is poor, but it is what it is.
Yeah, but it's with everything. Normally it's a paid for service.
Yeah.
And if you go with Nest, it's cheap and easy and free, but it doesn't give those benefits. So there is lots of advice on Nest's website, though, actually. It's a great website. There's lots of guides on there for both employees and employers. There's all the letter templates on there. It's actually one of the few really great services by the government that work really well. It's quite easy to use. It's quite easy to understand. I
would actually agree from an employer's perspective that the whole service is certainly, it takes the friction away and it makes it less daunting to deal with. I agree with that. It serves its purpose, but it's doing no more. And that's, I think, interesting and sad for some people, I guess. But okay, so anything else we need to consider when it comes to pensions, or more overarching when we're analysing our business from an overarching numbers perspective and the factor of pensions?
So there's two things to consider. Is every 3 years as a business, you have to opt everybody in again. So you have these 3 year intervals, and every 3 years you have to take everybody that's previously opted out of the pension scheme and put them back in the pension scheme, and then they say if they want to be excluded again. That's to avoid people opting out 10 years ago and forgetting that pension was ever an option.
What happens if you don't do that?
Well, you have to, and you have to make a declaration to the pension
regulator. What happens if it's an employee? Because I imagine most employees wouldn't even know they need to do that, so they haven't done it. So what's the outcome if they get? Well, how do they get caught? Who's policing that?
With the pension regulator polices it. So everybody's registered with the pension regulator.
Yeah.
And they'll be sending you reminders and letting you know what you've got to do and when you've got to do it. But it's the pension regulator that's policing.
Are they? I've never had, in 8 years, I've never heard from I don't even know there was a pension regulator. I've never heard from them, never written to my business.
Yeah, so there are different requirements depending on the size of the business and things like that. And some of it's managed through Nest for really small businesses. If you don't have any employees that have opted out, then you don't need to do anything. So that keeps it nice and simple. Well,
I have, and that's why I'm asking, because I've had an employee who's been opted out for more than that. I've probably not done that, and it's interesting that I've not had any letters. Yeah, it's why I say it's all very well having these things, but often how they're never policed, or how well are they policed, and what.
Yeah. And obviously the pension regulator is focusing on big businesses anyway. It's very unlikely to come down on small businesses. That's the reality. The other thing is this whole opt-in, opt-out. when you opt in an employee on the first month that they're opted into the pension, actually the pension provider how do I explain this in the right way? They won't take the payment for their pension contributions in month one. They give the employee 30 days. And if the employee doesn't opt out within 30 days, then they're fully in the scheme. If they opt out within 30 days, then you can actually refund the pension contributions to them the following month.
Okay.
So they do get their money back, but particularly for lower paid employees where they're opting out for financial reasons, i.e. they can't afford to pay into pension every month, that can be a bit of a problem for them on month one, because they get the money deducted and then you give it back to the next month's payroll. It's a stupid process. It is literally ridiculous.
Difficult argument, isn't it, that anybody can't afford to pay into anything, because if their income
it's 5% though.
If their income tax went up 5% in a couple of weeks in the budget, they wouldn't have a choice, would they? Like, people would just adjust. Like this fallacy that people can't afford certain things. If they take it first, then everything else adjusts afterwards, isn't it? It is what it is. I know it's a.
I agree. The vast majority of workers can afford it, but we saw recently what happened with inflation being at 5%, and look what that did to people and how long people were talking about the cost of living crisis for. So it does really hit some people. So it's just something to bear in mind as an employer when you're opting people in for the first time. You might get some angry workers coming saying, I can't put food on my table this week, and you might need to give them a little bit extra to tide them over until you can refund the pension the following month.
Fair enough. Good. Well, thanks for that little roundup of pensions this week, Claire. It's been really helpful. And let's find out what we're going to be talking about in this week's Profit Cash Growth Extra.
So this week's Profit Cash Growth Extra is something that I have been an advocate for blooming years now, isn't it? And I've been going on at you for a long time to do this, and you really have sort of taken my advice on board and thrown yourself wholeheartedly into it, haven't you?
I've done it before, and I've really struggled to get into the habit of doing it. So I've got two things to mention on here, because there's actually two Profit Cash Growth Extras, really. My true one is a daily stretching routine. So sounds crazy, but I do a lot of gym elements, and I'm over the age of 40 now, sadly. And I can definitely tell you with fact that once you get over the age of 40, and it's not like as fine as that, probably 38. Well, once you get towards this, middle of your life, things do get a little bit harder, and everything just is a little bit more difficult. And things take longer to repair, and all those kind of things. So, I mean, you do a lot of stretching and that kind of thing. And I'm not talking about like a whole yoga routine, but I'm just talking about literally 10, 15 minutes every day of just a basic routine going through your body, just stretching your body out and seeing if you can see those improvements. We have a masseuse that comes every 2 weeks, and what's interesting is I've started to see big results from getting into the habit of this. And I've probably been doing it for a good month now. I'm probably way 30 days in. I never miss a day. I now just make it part of my routine. I get up in the morning, I make a cup of coffee,
Put a
podcast on. Yeah, just more time to listen to podcasts. And I just do the 10-minute, the 15-minute routine, and I'm 100% feeling better. I feel so much better after the gym. I'm repairing quicker. The massage lady said that she could tell the difference in me.
And you can touch your toes again, can't
you? And I can touch my toes again. So it genuinely is making me feel so much better. But I think my point I want to make here is about habit. And I find, I think everyone finds this really hard, but once you're in it, there's a certain thing that happens. And I find this power of habit. I think there was a book written, wasn't it, called The Power of Habit. And I think it takes probably more than 14 days, but sometimes up to 30 days of doing something before it becomes a habit. And what I find, which this chemical goes off in my brain after that 30 days, where basically two things happen. If something in my life stops me from doing that particular thing that I formed a habit of, my brain feels both anger and guilt. So I start to get this anger that I can't fulfill the habit or the thing that I need to do that I now know is good for me. And I also then harbour this guilt that I've not managed to do that eats away at me. And it's a very, very, very powerful human emotion to help you stay absolutely on track and consistent with things. I have the same thing with this podcast.
I think it's interesting that you talk about the power of habit, because this world that we live in now of instant gratification, and it often doesn't exist in the real world.
I think it's harder for people to do this than ever before, because it's hard work.
Yeah.
Really hard work.
Well, it's not that hard work. I mean, let's be realistic.
Willpower's hard work.
No,
if we flip this to something you struggle with willpower on, you would.
Where we're going with this?
No, but I'm just saying. But my one was the stretching one. But you will have things that you massively struggle with, which you just cannot crack. So don't say that it's not hard. It's really, really hard.
Like chocolate.
Whatever it is. Yeah.
Like the amount of times that I've tried, I have like a little chocolate bar, like a 2-finger Kit Kat or something like that, chocolate biscuit after every meal, and I cannot crack it.
Cannot do that. And I did feel like that about the stretching thing. But you know what? I'm so pleased that, and I might still break. I'm 30 days in. Let's not get too.
You've got to see the benefits though, and I think that's the thing is, particularly in business, we try things and we don't give them a good enough go. And then we stop because we're like, oh, it's not working. No, you just haven't given it long enough.
Well, we were talking last week about the business has done it for 15 years and not really tried, and we've got a multi-million-pound business. It's just time in the game, isn't it? It's like everything, consistency and time in the game, and you'll get there.
But looking after your health is the most important thing.
You don't because everything else doesn't exist without it.
Yeah, you don't want to get to the point where you've got time and you've got money, but you're knackered and your body just can't do any of the things you want to do. So you've really, really got to look after yourself, and just stretching for 10 minutes every day. Game changing, isn't it?
Every bit of health. I mean, different people have different views. Some people absolutely love it. I watch these lists of people that go out running for 10 miles and whatever else. You know, I do what I do. I do my gym. You know, I do way more than the average now. And I know that that's important, but I hate every goddamn minute of it. And this is just another thing, the stretching habit, that I hate every goddamn minute of it. But you know what? That's life, isn't it? I think, was it Jeff Bezos that said that, you know, you enjoy 50%, you hate 50%. That's just life and normal in everything you do. So, you know, just make sure that the things you do that you hate are giving you massive reward. That's probably the way to look at it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Great.
Absolutely.
Well, another insightful podcast this week, Claire. Thanks for joining us as always. And as I always say, if you and your business feel like you may have outgrown your current accountant, please do give Claire and the team at Profit Cash Growth a call. You can book a free discovery call on the website in Claire's diary to have a little chitty chat about all of the things that you're currently facing at the moment, how her and the team might be able to help. Go to profitcashgrowth.com. As always, check out the YouTube channel, continue to listen to the podcast, and please rate, review and subscribe us if you like us.